computer. Got it. Okay. So see, waiting. There are 36 people waiting, but they're all admit all. Okay, got it. Admit them all. Wonderful.
There we go.
Yeah, thank you, everyone. So I just wanted to say thank you, Liesl, for availing yourself, and we'll go through the discussion. And as I said, we will share the document with all of you, and we will also share my research document on the role of Africans in the diaspora and the work of Liesl Riddle with the document that we will share with you. Everything that we talk about today, we'll share it with you.
Almaz, before we actually screen share though, it might be fun if everybody that could turned on their video camera for just a moment so I could take a picture so that we can post it. All right.
Oh, I love it. She's so good. See, you can see she's been teaching this forever.
All right, everybody, come on. Let me see ya. Let me see ya. Where are ya? Get a whole bunch of squares.
Yeah.
I see some familiar faces out there. Lots of new friends too. Hi, everyone. That's great.
Wonderful.
Look at all these great people that have joined us today, Almaz. Aren't we lucky?
We are lucky.
We've got some great backgrounds. We've got Marissa, I like that background. I want to be where you are in your background.
It's beautiful.
All right. I think that's very, very good. What a great group of people. Thanks for turning on your webcams, everybody. All right.
Thank you.
Take it away, Almaz. I'm sorry. I just wanted to get a picture.
No. So you can see Liesl does this all the time. Now also as a professor, because they can't teach on campus at George Washington, I know what she's going through. She's teaching all her classes online. So I'm glad you can see why I really needed her this morning. For those of you who do not know about the African Diaspora Network, I want to welcome each and every one of you. We are a network of Africans and Friends of Africa, and the latter is very important because I get questions from everyone. That was exactly the reason why ADN started. I wanted to see, I live here in Sunnyvale, been in Silicon Valley for so many years. I came as a foreign student to the United States, originally from Eritrea. Went to school in Amsterdam, and then from there I came and studied at USF. So really my life has been here in the Valley. My husband is an Eritrean semiconductor engineer, also lives here in Silicon Valley. We have our 2 children, 20 and 22 years old. So you are in my home, welcome to my house. But really the Diaspora Network is, I'm very humbled by what has happened, but it started about 10 years ago with this frustration that I wanted to see that I didn't see many Africans at the table when people were talking about Africa, especially in the Valley. There was a movement of social entrepreneurship that especially the Skoll Foundation committed to social entrepreneurship. Everyone meant very well, but there were very few Africans in present. And I really wanted to see that needs to be changed, and instead of complaining, I thought, what would it look like if we start African Diaspora Network? It was a very bold idea. I had no idea what I was doing, except I knew one thing. I believe that people of different backgrounds can work on a common vision. And that was the genesis of ADN. I also believe that Africa is not just a Black African continent. Africa is really the home of humanity, the birthplace of all humanity. And so people are drawn to Africa, not because of me or you or anything, but the land itself is so attractive. I knew this because when I took the first American delegation to Eritrea in 1996, to Eritrea and Ethiopia, that was my job anyway. My background is international business. When I took them after the war, and Eritrea at the time was completely, a devastated country, but yet when they went there, I have to tell you, they kept going and going, and I kept asking why. They said that, I think I have to admit everyone, they just felt this was a place where they want to be, and it was wonderful to see that the continent itself attracts people. Now, the question afterwards for me was, how about us? What is the role of the Africans in the diaspora to continue this collaboration, this interest that others have in Africa? How can we play a role? And bringing you back to the last 5 years, we were able to test this idea by bringing people together under the the African Diaspora Investment Symposium, where we bring about 300 to 325 people from around the world to Silicon Valley. And everything that we've had ideas about, we do it in a convening format where people can talk and convene and learn and connect with each other. And I think that platform has proved to work, because since the last one we had, January 23 through 25, for which I'm very grateful, because after that, many convenings were stopped. We had about 300, the highest number of participants was in just now, this year, 2020, about 325 to 350 people came through in 3 days to the convening. What this tells me is that whatever we've done in the past, it's such a hard work, but whatever we've done in the past really, really got people to take the idea seriously. And we saw the convening, the content of the discussion, the depth of the discussion, and the speakers was pretty much high level. And not just only on the speakers, but also the actions that we all want to take. And it is a process. It's not an end. We still have a long way to go, and we may not be able to answer all the questions today, but I encourage you to be patient with what we're trying to do, all of us. Bringing Africans, 54 countries together is not a simple thing. We're talking about a continent of 54 countries with complexity, country by country by country, even within countries, region by region. We have political, social, economic, other challenges. So it's a bold idea, but I do believe it works. It will take generations, but it doesn't matter. We have to begin somewhere today. And for what we have, I believe that we are going somewhere with this. And I do believe having diverse communities participate is very, very critical to the work that we're doing. This vision cannot be achieved by Africans alone. If you look at the diaspora, we are ambassadors for the continent. And that means that we really have to evangelize and change the narrative of Africa, not just a place where you give aid, but also a place where you invest. With that context, what I would like to share with you is I'm gonna give you some numbers that I'll share a screen with you on the presentation that we put together. And then Liesl will take some part of the presentation. And then we have some discussion questions that came from the audience. I also do hope you keep asking through the chat room. I have my colleague, Deborah Passio, who is taking the notes, and we will share everything that we discussed today. We'll share with you. This is the beginning. It's not an end. We have subsequent meeting that we wish to have moving forward. As part of our Impact and Innovation speaker series, we have the Builders of Africa's Future. You can learn as much as you want. Everything we do is on our website. But without further ado, let me just go into the presentation, and then we'll go from there. One last thing I want to share with you. The Skoll Foundation had as our meeting from 8 to 9:30 a.m. this morning. I am very open to that. I want to really respect their schedule. If you are willing to stay, I will be available, and we can use also as much the time to really discuss and go a little bit deeper on some of these issues. With that, let me just share with you the screen. Can you see, everyone? Can you see the screen?
Not yet.
Not yet?
Not the shared screen.
So why are you not seeing the screen? Sorry. Oh, okay. Share the screen. You should be able to see it now. How about now?
Yes. That's great.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you. Still have a long way to go. Okay, Admit. We have about 65 of you online. So I'm going to go ahead and just to go through. This is the introductory remarks, which I have already gone through. So I'm going to go to the Africans in the diaspora by the number, and then we'll talk about the creating and enabling ecosystem, which will also be a part of what Liesl will talk about. The number in the United States, it's 4.2 million according to Pew Research. This is immigrants who came to the United States legally. Please note that this number does not include refugees, which is unfortunate, and also people who come here as slaves, sexual or other kind of slavery. And we do know these things exist. The number 4.2 million is also very high in a sense for the diaspora from sub-Saharan Africa, because it includes Jamaica, Haiti, Trinidad, and Tobago. But most of the time, the ADN has been pretty much focusing on the sub-Saharan Africa. Those of us who came in the last probably since 1960s and late 1950s to the United States. African immigrants in California, this is also another one by the migration policy. Remember, this number pretty much is also the same as the earlier number. It pretty much gives you the numbers of Africans living in California that are considered legal immigrants, which is not fair because a lot of them are not counted to this, but that's all we have for right now to work with what we have. Most people ask the question, what is it that the Africans from the diaspora bring to the United States? We do hear a lot about efforts against immigrants and that immigrants take something away. But I have to tell you, like all other immigrants who have come before us to the United States, we contribute tremendously to the economy of the United States. In fact, throughout the United States and even here in Silicon Valley, when you look at education in ratio with other countries, Asia, Africans from the diaspora are the highest educated, well-educated part of that community. We do contribute tremendous amount of money in terms of taxes and contribution to the economy as a whole. We have, as I said, we have higher education. Healthcare, we know this because a lot of nurses and a lot of doctors from several parts of the continent pretty much are here, and we call this the brain drain, especially in health right now when we are talking about coronavirus. As you may have seen it, it is heartbreaking, but in many African countries, there is one doctor for every 5,000 in some areas. Those are the lucky ones. In some areas, it's one doctor for 10,000 people. And that's heartbreaking. And that's not only in doctors, but also nurses and other medical personnel, because a lot of them migrated to the United States. I can tell you where they come from most of the time. They are from South Africa, Ghana, Kenya, Ethiopia, and some other places in the continent. But a lot of them are coming in as, to make better life for themselves. And this is something that we need to talk about, the role of the responsibilities of African governments to keep the talent in the continent. They also need to provide them the resources they need to meet that, to be able to take care of their families. So that's a very, very important number or issue to talk about. Remittances, we talk about remittances all the time, and that's very, very important for ADN. I keep bringing this up all the time because it is very important. For those of you who may or may not know, but the Africans from the diaspora, I know Liesl will talk about the much bigger contribution of the diaspora, but just so you know, the diaspora remits 3 times more. It gives money through remittances to the continent 3 times more than what Africa gets from aid. What this is important. Even that 39.2 billion is a very, very low estimate. You can see sometimes 46 billion, sometimes 40 billion, depending on what source you're looking at. Right now, we're looking at the World Bank source. But remember, the diasporans give a lot more than this because some of the money is transferred from friends to family. Oh, you're going to Eritrea, can you please take this to my sister? Very simple thing to do. And this happens. There is no interest rate that we pay. There is no bank fee. You do it family to family, friends to friends. And so in that sense, Africa really gets a lot of funding from the diaspora. The majority of the money pretty much goes to Nigeria. It makes sense because Nigeria has 200 billion population, and they're pretty well suited to give money back to their continent, highly educated, have great jobs, and so on. And also not only that, just because there is sheer number, and also the fact that their need in their own home country is very high. The one that hits my heart is Liberia, because I know Liberians, as much as they are not at a level that they need to be in the United States professionally and other ways, they give so much to that country and never complain, but they give a lot of money. We'll talk about why this is important discussion. The question I've always asked is that enough? Is giving money to our family enough? I don't think so. I think we need to find ways to scale remittances so that we can also invest money in startups to support small and medium-sized enterprises in the continent. We have yet to figure this out, but it is very, very important. It's very important that we continue to discuss this. Nobody has showed me the final answer to this, but it's a search that we all are trying to go through, and I do look forward to conversation on how we might be able to do it. There are many different options, but I think it is better to really understand all these options and then come back to figure out what can we do, not only the diasporans, but also Friends of Africa. So, Liesl, I think you talk more about the role of the diaspora besides remittances. So I will give you this chance to really speak about this wonderful work that you've done for many years. And I want to just have you discuss and share with us what your thoughts are and what can we do, we from the diaspora, to support. And let me know when you want me to go to the next
Sure. Actually, if you could just go back one slide, because I think this is a very busy slide. So if you just go back one, no, go back, no, go back.
Oh, back, okay.
Yeah, you're going forward. Go back to previous, and then one more previous. There we go. This is a very busy slide, so there's some
okay.
So I just wanted to kind of start here, and then we'll add in the examples. So as Almaz mentioned, I have been focused since the late 90s on really trying to understand, reflect, and transmit information about how different diaspora communities globally, and whether their country of residence is in the United States or in some other country, and across various different countries of origin, really trying to understand this whole transnational phenomenon as it relates to economy and therefore society. So it's a very sort of very big umbrella that I put around the research that I have done. I've worked now on projects specifically dedicated to over 30 different diaspora communities. I started off early in my career as more on the scholarly side. So I was doing this research more to develop theories about why do people invest in their countries of origin, and often for reasons more than just profit. And this sort of predated a lot of the work that is now extremely well known around social impact investment and so on and so forth. But I really wanted to understand why migrants in particular, why their descendants, i.e. the whole term diaspora, why people might engage back in countries of origin in different ways. But then I switched sort of mid-career and started to really focus on how to take those theories and experiences and really try to apply it in more of a policy setting. And there I found for a period of time I was doing work for USAID, doing work for the International Organization for Migration and several different countries of origin in terms of their outreach to diaspora communities. There I felt more my role was to be able to take good practice or really good stories that I'd heard in one diaspora community and share it with another. Because although diasporans are all very different in terms within their communities and across the communities, the movement across borders has lots of different causes and implications. But it's interesting that I've noticed over time that the types of activities that diasporans want to engage in, do engage in, and many of the outcomes that they're trying to achieve are common, despite all those origin differences, demographic differences, and even through space and time. And so I feel like one of the great fortunes I've had is just being able to bear witness to this movement, this globalization of capital that really I felt took off in the early 2000s, and got to participate in that. There is an article that I have a link here to that I'll share with you in just a minute that I wrote for the International Organization for Migration that summarizes a lot of that work, that gives you some ideas of all the different ways that diasporans engage and some very specific examples and some of the implications of that for governments that you might find interesting. The real crux of the research, though, around why do diasporans invest in their countries of origin, I don't think will surprise many of you, right? So we've been able to kind of show through various different surveys and focus groups and interviews across different diaspora communities that up in the right-hand corner, this sort of model that we have of why do people invest their time, their talent, their treasure in their country of origin. It's not very straightforward. It's not just because they want to make money. It's also not just because it makes them feel good, that emotional return that you get. There are other reasons. It depends on the person and the context, and things like, in many cases, if it becomes a highly valued activity, both within your diaspora community or your country of origin, to do so, there are some social status benefits. People can invest for reasons because it helps their social status within their given community. In some cases, I've heard people say that one of the reasons they invest in their country of origin is more for political reasons, that if they invest in their country of origin, they believe that they might get access to more political influence, or being able to get more access to policymakers, or even in some cases gain political protection for friends and family back home because of that business activity. Others I have found have said that the reason that they actually invest is because they want to see some institutional change in their country of origin, and they believe that their human or their financial capital or even their social capital is a means to that end. Often what you find, though, is that it's a mixture of these things, right? And for every individual person, the particular weights of to what extent financial versus emotional versus political, et cetera, motivations might vary by person in terms of how much that really is their driving factor. And then there are differences across different diaspora communities. The reason I sort of take us down that very sort of academic pathway is because I think the motivations of why, the psychological drivers of why people engage in this behavior then shows up in the business forms of that engagement. So as Almaz was mentioning, obviously we all sort of associate the economic contributions of diaspora often in these cash transfers between friends and families, these remittances. But as many development experts have pointed to, that has simply sending cash home has its limitations in terms of long-term development. And it often then also creates a dependence on those that are actually remitting, and therefore a pressure in and of itself. So that's why a lot of folks have started to look at models to go beyond just remittances. And many of you probably participate in these types of things, whether it be savings accounts in your country of origin that oftentimes those that are receiving your remittances can use to collateralize loans, for example, or to get other access to credit. These types of going beyond remittances were one of the first sets of programs, I think, that really started to emerge to try to solve the development challenges of remittances alone. And of course, now there are all these solutions of using your remittances to actually directly bill pay back in country of origin, be able to pay people to be able to pay not only their bills, but insurance and education types of expenses and so on, directly giving the remitter more control. So remittances, I think, has gotten a lot of, whenever you kind of go to a lot of these development meetings, they always kind of talk about how can we go on and think beyond remittances. And they usually focus on how to leverage remittances for other development ends. I like to draw a much larger umbrella, though, around what diasporans actually do to contribute economically back to their countries of origin for development purposes. I think one area that is undervalued in the development speak, the development action, and the research is really the role that tourism plays. We are all in a moment right now, unfortunately, where this is not an avenue available to most of us, but it hopefully, God willing, we will be in a time in future where it will be available to us again. But homeland tourism, when you go back to visit your friends and family, the choices that you make when you do that about how you spend money has supply chain effects in the country of origin, and being more intentional about return trips home, whether it be for business or pleasure, whether it be heritage tourism. All of these things have ancillary spillover effects in local country of origin economies. And diasporans thinking more deeply about how to better leverage the time that they spend when they go home to spend money in ways that contribute to sustainable supply chains, I think is very important. But diasporans, so many of you on the call already participate in skills transfer, whether that's through one-offs that you create in terms of leveraging your social network and sharing your human and social capital with your friends, your family, people that people introduce you to through your network, or whether it's through more formal organizations that actually organize diaspora skilled talent and help remit that skilled talent back home, either through virtual communication and mentorship and connections, or through face-to-face. So I like to also include skills transfer in our thinking about diaspora engagement. Obviously, philanthropy, whether that's supporting charities that have been created by diasporans that are designed to be transnational, leveraging capital, financial capital and human capital from the diaspora and bringing it back home, or directly supporting charities in the country of origin, or even international charities, the international NGOs that have locations back in a country of origin. We often, when we think about diaspora engagement, though, I think what we think about is that entrepreneurship, that innovation that is really can be so earth-shattering and changing for countries of origin, where that innovation transfer through direct investment can occur. And then I know many of you from the questions that you're interested in talking about are also interested in what are some of the good models that have been created for portfolio investment, whether that's a diaspora bond or some other type of fund where you can use your money to invest. And so when I think about sort of, now, Almaz, if you can just then put up our examples. When I think about, there's so many different examples from the continent that one could talk about. I've just sort of picked out a couple, and again, more of these are mentioned, these and more are mentioned actually in that article and other work that I've done, but just to illustrate some of the interesting innovations I've seen in the continent around this circle. I don't know how, I've got some examples here, not only from Sub-Saharan Africa, but also North Africa, just to be inclusive. And one of my favorite stories about creative approaches to marketing to diaspora for development ends in country of origin comes from the Tunisian bank Biat. Biat actually recognized that there were a lot of informal transfers coming from the diaspora in Paris in particular back to Tunisia. And they wanted a way to be able to formalize that fund, and so that they could then offer to people, their diasporans as well as their recipients of their remittances, opportunities to leverage diaspora remittances for various different other products like bill pay that I mentioned before, and using diaspora savings for collateralizing loans to people in the country of origin. So Biat said, we need to figure out a way, how do we find the diaspora, directly market to them in Tunisia, to encourage them to take with their informal transfers and put them into actual formalized bank savings in Biat branches, and let them know that the advantage of doing that is because then they get access to all these beyond just remittances types of services. So there's this very, very creative company, and I'll put it the link to the chat in the chat box in just a minute when Almaz starts talking again, so you can follow up if you're interested. There's a really interesting company in Paris that serves global markets. But what they're able to do is they are able to identify from household registrations high probabilities that the people that live in that household are from a certain country of origin. And they're linguistic experts that have created this company. And so they're able to take a list of household registrations and tag them for their probability of being Tunisian, for example. And then they were able to map where do all those households live in the city of Paris. And they were able to identify the clusters of where those folks live. And then they developed a very efficient traffic route to take, and then they hired vans and put loudspeakers on them to travel throughout these neighborhoods, speaking in that dialect of Arabic, to reach out to the Tunisian the Tunisian diaspora there, and letting them know about these savings accounts, what the benefits might be, and so on and so forth. I thought there was a very interesting and very creative way of identifying diaspora community abroad, and then being able to raise awareness of ways to go above and beyond household cash transfers. I've already mentioned diaspora tourism at length, and so I won't go into it too much in depth here. Obviously, we all hope that that particular arm of diaspora tourism, there's so much heritage tourism that goes on the continent. But I wanted to turn quickly to GIMP, no, go back to Almaz, to skills transfer, all kinds of opportunities for diasporans to engage. I think that GIMPA, which is their business school, in Ghana, has done some really interesting, they've built an entire executive MBA program that combines local talent that needs and wants an executive MBA program with diasporan professors. And so they've created this half online, half face-to-face MBA program, and they've recruited diasporans with expertise to create half online classes that are taught while they're teaching their classes abroad, and then they come during their breaks and do the face-to-face versions or aspects of those courses during when their schools abroad are actually on holiday. So it's a very interesting, innovative model, I think, that GIMPA has used within higher education to take advantage of diaspora talent, but there's so many examples of that on the continent. I've put here in terms of an example of creative philanthropy. I think we're familiar with a lot of the sort of more mainstream kinds of philanthropic examples on the continent, but there are also some really interesting niche charities that I think have opened up by diaspora ingenuity to serve certain niche need markets, if you will, back in countries of origin. And so one of my favorites is called Coptic Orphans. It is exactly what it says. The Coptic Christian diaspora all throughout the world have been organized through this charity created by a woman here in Northern Virginia. And they focus on raising financial capital as well as some human capital from the Coptic Christian diaspora to target orphans in this minority community in Egypt, and to support them through their life, their education, all the way up and through until tertiary education. It's been a very interesting, successful model. One of my favorite examples of direct investment on the continent, of course, is the Boston Day Spa. I wonder if we have any Ethiopians on our group here today. But the founder of the Boston Day Spa, I could go on and on about the wonderful story, but he himself was a refugee living here in the United States. Learned all about salon services here in a job training program that he went through. And his big dream was always to go back, as he did, to Ethiopia and create a spa. But I think the great part of that story is not just the knowledge transfer and the creation of a service and so on and so forth. I think the real greatness of that story is that it began with a diasporan going to a village where there was almost no employment and telling folks, you guys know how to create a building, I know how to do a spa. If you help me build my building, I will give you lifetime employment and I will train you on how to perform and work in my spa. And that's exactly how the original Boston Day Spa, which is now many stories and a lovely place if you've never visited it, got started. And of course, I think we're going to talk later, I think, in our question and answer session about various different portfolio investment options. Obviously, the Nigerian diaspora bond, the Ethiopian diaspora bond has gotten a lot of attention. But I think there's a real opportunity in the African diaspora market to think about diaspora created types of bonds and donor advised funds. I think there's some real possibility there. So we've had, I think the continent itself has so many rich, innovative examples. And I think, of course, ADN is a wonderful example of diaspora engagement as well. And it's a place where you learn a lot about these wonderful innovations. And so the next slide, simply, I'll just say that the piece that I've written, which you can read later if you're at all interested, really just tries to tie all that wonderful work to how the diaspora actually really play a role in, I think, a very critical role in sustainable development goals for the world. These are just some of the sustainable development goals that all that wonderful activity, I think, goes and supports. But my article was really more to make a point that I felt like that the entire conversation about the role that migrants play within sustainable development goals, it was hardly mentioned in the SDG conversation, and where it was mentioned, migrants were positioned as being only painted as being in need of help because of the SDGs. And the point I was trying to make in the article is that the world of migration is much more complex than that, and there are actors, namely the diaspora, in many cases, that are in positions to have more agency, to be able to play a leading role in guiding all of us in leading forward to make a more sustainable development in the continent and elsewhere around the world. I think it's important, Almaz has already mentioned, that we can't, as diaspora, we can't necessarily get anything done without government interaction at some level. And I think Almaz will be talking more about the important role that governments must play in order to help unlock the power of the diaspora and allow them to be able to bring those innovations that then has implications for things like food supply chains, healthcare services, education, business development, and other types of diaspora partnerships that lead to that innovation and knowledge transfer that's so important for development. All right,
Thank you. Yes, thanks, Liesl. So I think what you've done for us, Liesl, is you laid down the opportunities that, well, not only the opportunities, but the work of the diaspora, the contribution of the diaspora. So I believe, and this is just personal experience and from work and all observations throughout the last almost 10 years working with the diaspora, one of the biggest challenge, and my paper that I wrote in 2012, which I will share with you too, is based, this discussion is based on that. In 2012, the African Union announced the first Global African Diaspora Summit. They actually considered the diaspora as the sixth region. In that, so I participated in Sandton in South Africa. I was there when all the African heads of states were there to sign up the document. It's always easy to say than to do. And so I think the conversation with the African Union, I'll put it on the side. But what I would like to share with you is that for all these things to happen, for the diaspora to really scale up the remittances, I do believe that we have to have a meaningful partnership with the governments of Africa. Each country is different. Each government operates differently. Without mentioning who's who, by just sheer factor that we're talking about 54 countries, they all have different laws, but it is very, very critical to engage the diaspora meaningfully. For example, in the last probably, I don't know, maybe 13, 14 years, many African countries recognize the value of the diaspora. And a lot of them have started to create a position, a diaspora engagement officer, or even a cabinet level positions within their governments. Ethiopia is one of them, Nigeria, Ghana. The Ghanaian president is very, very much engaged in this discussion. But when we talk about Ghana, we're actually talking the Ghanaian government is pretty much interested in all diaspora, historical contemporary diaspora. And there was this coming back home campaign this last year. Many African Americans went to Ghana. There's tremendous movement in Ghana, and there's tremendous recognition of the government and the connection to the diaspora. The challenge for the diaspora is trust. So trust, we give money to our families simply because we have a reason why we don't really do this with the governments, and this has to do with how we left our home. And it's not every country, but country by country. There are individuals who have come for political reasons that they probably do not have the partnership with their governments, but there are other means to do it. But one thing I do believe the governments of Africa can do is really create a conducive space for the diaspora to partner with them, to be able to provide their resources, skills, all these things that Liesl mentioned. It's only done in country by country. It's not 54. And I know it is a lot to think about. How can the majority Africans from the diaspora make this possible? I do think that given that many of our Africans, whether in the diaspora or in the continent, their biggest challenge being access to capital, working with governments and creating a possible, and improved incentives for the diaspora that governments can give when they come to invest, that's very critical. But the law, when we invest, whether it's in our own home country or in the place where we live, investment it denotes that you're actually getting something in return. And so we need to know when we invest, can we get a return on our investment? And for the diaspora, it has never been, in my opinion, mostly about money. It's about whatever I invest in that country, would it help my community to thrive? And that's critical, because as Africa population grows, what are we looking for the continent? So I think the government, the collaboration with government is very, very critical to the future of the continent. There are some different questions that have been asked, but I think from us, the African Diaspora Network, we've been very much focused on individuals and organizations and corporations, really trying to mobilize our own diaspora. We have not really made an effort, or really we haven't put the effort needed to work with governments, but we started with the Kenyan government, and that's why I have the Minister of IT on that picture on the top, is really to bring that discussion, and he was fantastic at the last symposium. We're trying to work with him in ways in which we can really figure out how the diaspora can work with the continent. And just final point I want to mention is, I personally believe that for Africa to develop and for the diaspora to make a meaningful impact in the continent, at one point, we have to look at the continent as one country. What I mean by that is that we need to be open to do intra-diaspora, intra-country, intra-Africa collaboration. If I am only thinking about my Eritrea well-being, and then I am really not looking at other opportunities. This is not for everyone, but for those of us who are capable of investing in other parts of the continent, I think we should be open to that, because usually we have been focused on where we come from rather than what is needed within the continent. And so that denotes too that, or that makes us, or it moves us to work with each other, to collaborate, to figure out ways to do this. And it's not going to be one person, or it's not going to be just you by yourself, but I also think it's that by working with our own friends of Africa. And so bringing them into this space, having to collaborate and co-invest with others is also critical to the future of the continent. So the next slide. So a lot of you have had many questions, and so I don't know how much time. Can I just ask if you all are willing to stay for the for the next half an hour? It's about almost 40 minutes. Could I count on all of you to stay? I'm just going to assume that you will be staying, whoever is able to stay, because we thank the Skoll Foundation for giving us that 30 minutes as well. The first question, as I mentioned earlier, the first question that we had was about whether the African Diaspora Network has a collaboration with the African Union. To be very honest with you, I did participate in the 2012 declaration of the African diasporans as the 6th region, but primarily we've been focusing on the diaspora. There is a room for us to participate and to collaborate. I have worked with the Washington, D.C. based, the former AU ambassador to the United States, but I believe there is a change in leadership, and we will continue to do that. But I think that is an area where we do need to find ways to work together. How is ADN assisting Africa? Well, COVID-19 is going to change everything that we're talking about. And this breaks my heart. I think at the beginning I mentioned, it's a very, very difficult thing, because if a country like Eritrea, my home country, or other countries are really looking at one doctor for 5,000 patients or 10,000 patients, how is Africa going to deal with this? And this is something I cannot tell what Africans from the diaspora, the doctors, the nurses, those professionals to do. But I think at one point we need to step back and say, what are we going to do? Are we going to see people die and do nothing? Or what are we going to do? If we see what's happening in the United States, one of the richest regions in the world, suffering with what to do, even still figuring out how to deal with this really massive global challenge. Imagine what would that look like for a continent that has so much challenge. So I think it's a heartbreaking thing. I am praying that this does not happen. But if this comes to us, and I have had 3 different phone calls with some very, very prominent Africans from the diaspora asking us what to do, I am actually really hoping this doesn't happen. But when the mobilization comes, I will talk to the board and then we'll see what we can do to participate in that call, because at the end of the day, I still feel helpless by sitting at home and not being able to even support or do things in my own community in Silicon Valley. So what can we do? I think there is something that we can do, and I can promise you ADN will do the best it can to do to mobilize, but at the end of the day, it's individuals' decision. We cannot tell people what to do. We can only provide the information, and I personally will do the best I can to support whichever country in Africa, because I think this is going to be a big problem. If it goes to, if this attacks Africa, we are really looking devastating numbers, because you've seen what happened yesterday in the US. There is a huge opportunity, there's a possibility that from 100,000 to 200,000 will die. And that's if all things work very well. I think it's really devastating. This is a new area and it's a very emotional thing for all of us right now. But I do believe that the diasporans will step up, and those who can will help. But this is going to be a big, big emotional, social, economical, and other challenges for each and every one of us. But I can guarantee you that we will do the best we can to mobilize those who are able to go. And then I'll just go a little bit further on this, because I don't think I have enough time, because I want to make sure we get questions from the audience. I want to go into number 5, because one of the, what are the internal resistance or arguments that members of the African diaspora struggle to overcome when considering investment opportunities? I think I mentioned that earlier. Most of the time it has to do in the relationship that they have with the country where they come from, or the country where they've been asked to invest, or the project. I also believe that trust is key, not only to the diaspora, but to any of us when we do any kind of investments based on trust and also outcome. I would encourage each one of us who want to look for diasporans to invest in your project. Be patient, take time to engage us in what that is. And I know where this came from, this question. So I'm answering this question because this group of people are doing the best they can to engage the diaspora. They are not diasporans themselves, but they are members of the African Diaspora Network, and they do the best they can to engage the diaspora, but it has not been easy. And I say this because it's never easy to put your money into something, but when the diasporans believe in projects, they will invest in projects. And these are questions that came. The other one is how can we drive conversation and shift narrative on youth unemployment? I think this is very critical because the Africa has the youngest population, and that means I think we need to look at as an opportunity. And the only way we look at it as an opportunity is if we start to invest in that group and invest early on. And that's very, very critical to the well-being of the continent. And so we're all doing the best we can. And I think you've seen what Liesl was sharing in terms of those kind of investment. There are many different programs that are really making this possible. I can mention the Mastercard Foundation has a huge and very bold vision for Africa by 2030. They have this goal of really getting, I think it's in the high millions of capable individuals, well educated, to stay in the continent, to invest in those youth, and then come back to their countries to provide that economic development. I know they are all over the United States and around the world. And African Diaspora Network is also very delighted to partner with the Mastercard scholars here at UC Berkeley. And we will continue to do the best we can to work with other organizations to make sure that we amplify the need. How can we leverage the diverse network? I think this is also very important. Sometimes there are so many of us, and I don't see it as a competition. I think we are, even in my opinion, we're too small and too very limited. I think we need to enlarge that network, provided that we are willing to work and collaborate with each other. Again, it's always easier said than done when you talk about collaboration and participation in things. Many different things become an issue, but I think we will continue to do the best we can. I'll stop there, and then I will just open up for Q&A, and I'm not sure how this works, but you can unmute yourself if you have a question. If too many of you, I'll try to figure out how to deal with that.
Hi, hey Almaz, Masrat here.
Hi, Masrat.
How are you?
Good.
You just mentioned that when a diaspora believes in something, they actually do invest. I have been talking to you and others. We are developing a diaspora crowdfunding platform to mobilize capital for Ethiopian SMEs and create employment opportunities. Hopefully we could do it very soon. So how do we actually make the diaspora believe in that? I heard you mention a few things, but there's got to be something where we can take a very tiny percentage of the remittances that can create sustainable businesses in Africa.
Thank you, Maseret. Yes, you and I talked. Maseret is calling from Ethiopia. Welcome. I think, Maseret, you are actually in the right ecosystem right now. Ethiopians are very, very gung-ho about investing in Ethiopia. And so I would continue to encourage you. The model that you're using has to appeal to the people that you're reaching out. But I do believe that there's a lot of, and Liesl can talk about this too, there's a huge movement within the Ethiopians to make sure that they invest in their country. And I wouldn't know why they are not, but I think it takes time, Maseret, you know this. Our people, we are also very skeptical of each other sometimes. You just have to continue to persist and really give them a value that they cannot resist. I have yet to see an Ethiopian who's not interested in investing in Ethiopia. Just to give you an example, a few days ago, some of the Ethiopians on Twitter, they start to challenge each other. Someone challenged me, and this is mainly for philanthropic purposes to really help with COVID-19 in Ethiopia. People were just rallying to give money, and it was even as little as $200 or as little as $50 or as high as whatever people can give. They're doing that simply because they want to be ahead of the game in terms of really providing the country with the resources it needs. So I would encourage you to keep sharpening, and sometimes as needed to, pivot on what you're doing, and then understand what the interest is in from the Ethiopians. But you have also some challenges because I think competition in a way, because there's a huge Ethiopian diaspora fund that has been created by the prime minister, but pretty much well run by the Ethiopians in the diaspora. And they're the ones that are really getting, I guess, ahead of this in terms of diasporans giving back to the country. And so we will continue that conversation, but that's what I see right now.
Hi, Almaz. This is Hawani. In your presentation, what I'm hearing is there needs to be a cultural mind shift too. And so how do we do that parallel with education shift? I think investment, when we talk about investment, I truly believe for Africa to change in the next 10, 15 years, and reflecting on the failures of the MDG goals, I think part of the problem is we didn't invest in education in the right way. And so 30 years later, we're still talking about what is happening at the youth level, what is happening at the adult level, what is happening at the university level, when we could have remedied some of these issues that you bring up, cultural shift, mind shift, investment shift, and moving the conversation from, yes, people will invest money, but how do we invest in education? Education from the African standpoint, education from the continent standpoint, because we always lose that conversation somehow. We brush up on it and then we go to, oh, where's the money going? Well, if we don't know how to invest in the money and we don't know how to use the money, 30 years later, we'll still be talking about what's happening with us. Why do we have one doctor for 5,000 people?
Yes. So, Liesl, do you want to take some part of it and I'll answer some of it on the education investment?
No, I was just in agreement. I feel like there have been a lot of educational solutions that have been focused on Africa specific, but less that I've seen, and I've given the example of GIMPA, it's just one tiny example of diaspora being able to become more involved in educational activities back in country of origin. And I think that that's really where the institutional change really occurs. And I think increasingly as technology becomes more available, that becomes slightly more possible, but nothing really truly can replace that face-to-face interaction in spreading financial literacy and all these other types of cultural change that I think is so critical. And it's not just at the base. I think you also talked a little bit about, adult education. And I think one of the things, for example, at my university, we have created a capital market certificate where we're trying to identify, along with the World Bank and the IFC, those that are high potential young people that are working within the central banking system, to bring them to our university to do some learning around the capital markets and cross-learning across different types of capital market systems. But here's where I think the diaspora comes in. One of the things Almaz and I have been talking about is that whole conversation about capital markets and the formal global financial economy often leaves out the role that diaspora can and should play. And so one of the things I'm really excited about is that the African Diaspora Network is going to be partnering with George Washington University to do some outreach and education of those capital market high potential managers from Africa to talk about the role of diaspora capital and diaspora network and connectivity. And so it's not just about educational models for the youth, truly young. It's also, I think, for even education for the elites, for the power makers, or power brokers and decision makers of the country.
Thank you, Liesl. And then again, on the cultural, I think I understand what you're talking about. I think it is to really make a shift in thinking. I think we grew up under so many different colonies and all kind of things. We've been told, you are Ghanaian and you are only responsible for Ghana. You're an Eritrean, you're only responsible for Eritrea. You're better than the Ghanaians. We have really grew up in societies that we were told what I found them to be not true in my own, I mean, that only comes out of growth, that each one of us have been a part of different societies. Some of us are in Canada, some of us are in the United States, some of us in Europe. We are everywhere as diasporans. We pretty much, roam the world in Europe. So we really have found a way, not all of us, and I'm gonna say this, not every diaspora has had the opportunity to go to school and to be where they can be professionally. We're talking about also the diasporans, the mothers and the fathers who do taxi driving, housekeeping, very, very long hours work to make sure that their children go to school, their children get the better education. If you ask me what kills me about remittances is, I know some of these women and men who work so hard, and at the end of the day, almost 60% of their income goes to support people in Africa. If we ask the core question to me is, the very reason that these people are still depending on their families abroad to give them money reflects back on the leadership in Africa. So I think in some ways, we need to keep these governments accountable. If there is any possibility to do that, I have no idea. We're not an advocacy agency, but if we could work together collaboratively to figure out a way to shift the responsibilities to these governments so that actually Africans can live a sustainable life in their own home country where they depend less on remittances. The cultural shift will also come when we really see that people needing less remittances. I'm always asking the question, if there was a measurement of success for any country in a country in Africa, would it be possible to see by how less of remittances they get than how much more remittances they get? So if we want to measure the success of the continent one day, I would like to see that remittances to the to the continent from the diaspora is much less, but investment is much higher. So when we look at it that way, we're really looking at a different culture, a different way of thinking on how we really put where our money, and I can see us investing in education. I can tell you so many wonderful examples of diasporans who went back to their home country. One of them comes to me, Patrick, from Ashesi University. And then there is an Ethiopian group, Denotes University in Addis Ababa. These are Ethiopians who put all their money together and created a university, and other kind of healthcare institutions in Ethiopia. Again, I use Ethiopia as an example because there are about 120 Ethiopian doctors who put all their money together to build one of the best hospitals in Ethiopia. I look forward to seeing that. But there are so many different such initiatives going, and I'm very grateful for the diaspora for what they do. But one day my dream is that we will not just do it in the countries where we come from, we will also really look at it at the continent as a whole and start to invest in many different parts as we see fit. Other questions? Thank you.
Hi, Alma.
Yes.
Almaz, this is Mami. Mami Afan. I'm with the African Women's Development Fund USA.
Oh, hi.
And I wanted to also highlight how African women and girls are seen in the diaspora and what kinds of support and resources are available to them. I was really moved by the point that Liza made around SDGs and the diaspora. And while the SDGs, you know, sort of talk about women in general and the different things, so excuse me, there is a lack of emphasis on African women and girls, African women and girls in the diaspora. And there are certain narratives going to the point of the cultural shift, the mindset shifts, you know, and just the narratives of the diaspora. So sitting with the African Women's Development Fund USA, what we have seen is that there is a narrative that is not concise, that, you know, if you come to the US or you are in Canada or you are in Australia, wherever in the diaspora you may find yourself, that automatically you have access to resources and that your life is changed, you know, for the better because you have greener pastures. And so there has been a narrative from the West where even when it comes to philanthropy and resourcing support for African women, those who are in the diaspora don't receive any attention, or if they do, very limited. And anytime you bring that question up, that what you hear is, oh, our emphasis and our priority is on women who are in the global south. And it makes me wonder, does an African woman change by virtue of where they are located? Do the issues they face and the sort of like the challenges that they have to deal with change because they find themselves in a situation? And so I'm just wondering how we begin to highlight these issues. I mean, here in California, I have the opportunity to work with Mastercard scholars, you know, and a lot of young students who are here. And we are seeing that mental health, especially for young African women, is so important. We've had African students who have committed suicide right here in the Bay Area in 2 universities, and all women. You know, so it's really something that we are trying to raise awareness about, and to say that how do we begin to put resources in the hands of African women and girls who are in the diaspora? How do we make sure they can access leadership opportunities, different kinds of opportunities to build their capacity, to build their personal development, psychosocial, professional? So I really want us to talk a little bit about that, you know, and I'm wondering what views and ideas are around that.
So I think, Mame, you bring something that we don't talk about. Usually, you know, the Diaspora Network, including us, we're always talking about what can we do to the continent, what can we do in the continent. And at times we forget ourselves. And so I'm very aware of this. Again, I think I mentioned earlier, it's what it's me as a person is when I see, I mentioned a lot of these hardworking diasporans, they earn their money and then a lot of it goes back to the continent. They're not even really looking at the well-being of their own children, simply because they are really trying to make sure that their families back home are taken care of. I think there is a big role that we all can play. I do the best I can. It's not always enough. But I think ADN is working. And for example, I had a call yesterday with the people running the Mastercard Scholars Program at UC Berkeley. One of their interests is really to have a diverse group of students, women and men, to be a part of the Mastercard Scholars. And I think it's a fantastic effort. But at the same time, I'm also aware of the loneliness when you come as a foreign student to a country that you're not aware of. I came as a foreign student, so I know it. Some of us are very good at working through it, but for a lot of us, it's a huge challenge. We haven't really identified how to help, how to work. And it's also not only on African immigrants. This is really an immigrant problem from wherever we come from. It is something that I'm aware of through what's happening in many different universities. But I would like to figure out a way for us to work, Mame, and see if we can make an effort to identify the need and then see if we can mobilize, even convening, and then figure out resources that we can provide. For example, there were students from Stanford University, foreign students from Africa, a couple of Nigerians who came to me and spoke about this 2 years ago. Where were you when we came? We wish we knew there was ADN. And the reason they said that, not because we did anything for them, I think they just felt at home to be around a network that welcomes them. That in itself is a wonderful thing. It's not about money. This is about emotional and social support. I think, Mame, you're talking about. I would love to, we do the best we can. It's never enough. It will never be enough. But if we can leverage the resources that we have to support, I'm all for it. Thank you.
Definitely. I'll definitely follow up and try and get some time so that we can chat on this and figure out a way, since we are all in the Bay Area. So
thank you. Thank you. Any other questions? We have 2
Yes,
minutes. Yes.
Hello, everyone.
Hi. Hi.
Achille?
Yeah, go ahead.
Is
or
it
maybe
Achille?
Go ahead. Achille.
Yes,
Achille.
Achille.
Right?
Okay. Yeah, go ahead.
Sorry for interrupting, Elizabeth. Quick question regarding us as a diaspora. I think someone mentioned, I think it's Martin, that there's so many organizations that shouldn't we be focusing on how we can best federate all these organizations in terms of ways of working, in terms of how we get together and have chats like this, how we can, have actual working groups to work on some of these hot topics like COVID, for example. Shouldn't we be trying to enable us as a diaspora to be effective and to have our voices heard? And how can we do that?
Yeah, well, now you are in. So I really like that, Achille. I think we should, and I would like to count on you. After this, if you could email me, let's go ahead and create a committee, because the coronavirus is not going to wait for you and I. It will happen when it happens. Wouldn't it be wonderful if we can come up with few of us, start to discuss about this, and then come up with the workable possibilities in the future? So I am all for it.
Yes, I'm actually working on with a group of people that contacted me on LinkedIn on such a framework that we want to, instead of giving fish to our diaspora organizations, we're working on a tool set that we'll share with the different organizations. Our challenge is going to be identifying the credible diaspora organizations and also identifying local actors that can tell us on a country per country basis what are the actual needs. Some countries are better organized in terms of their diaspora, in terms of the health system, in terms of, governments are having lockdowns, but also providing food to their populations. I mean, the challenges are different. So yes, we have a group that's working, open to share what we're doing. If you're interested, you can email me.
Yes, please. Well, you go ahead and send me something, and then what you're doing. And we'll try to also, as I mentioned earlier, there are a few people who have reached out to us specifically on the health and diaspora, and be very happy to read what you're doing and go from there.
Certainly.
Wonderful. Thank you. Elizabeth?
Yes.
Hello.
Hi. Hi, how are you? So I'm based in Kuala Lumpur. I'm working, actually I run an organization that is called Tan Invest, and we facilitate foreign direct investments into African countries as well, based working with investors here in Southeast Asia. But what I did want to talk to you about, number one would definitely be to how do we extend this network? Because it sounds like it's very much concentrated in the Americas, and it would be great for us to have some type of extension over to Asia, because there is a huge diaspora community here as well that I think would like to be involved in the network. That would be the first question. The second question is, besides working with Tan Invest, what I also do, my partner and I, who's also on this conference right now, we are currently working on a platform that is also going to be a crowdfunding platform. And one of the things that you mentioned earlier was the issue of overcoming, I guess, intra-country investments. And given the situation, I mean, the different investment regulations in each country, exactly how do you think a diaspora would be able to overcome these? Say, for example, I'm from Zimbabwe and I want to invest in Nigeria, for example. How do you suggest that those type of issues would actually be overcome? Because I think that's one of the issues that a lot of people that I face, that I speak to, that I discuss with in terms of them investing in various other countries. I think this is a growing concern.
Yeah. So Elizabeth, I'm going to answer the last question first. So yes, intra-Africa investment is not an easy thing. In fact, I served on the UN Economic Commission for Africa. That was one of their challenge was intra-Africa migration. Just imagine how hard it has been. On the investment, you would think it would be easy, still not easy. And in fact, in one of the slides, what I'm mentioning is the African governments have to really make an effort to make it easier for Africans from the diaspora to invest. We have been sorry to say this, but for many African countries, we are the money, the cash cow that just keeps giving money. They know that we will never let down of our families, and they know we will support. I think it is up to us to really figure out how to make this possible. And there are some movement and some groups that are trying to work with different countries, depending on where you're investing. Again, Elizabeth, this is country by country. It's not easy. I said it, it's harder to do it, but it's easy to say. Even these governments are still trying to figure out what it looks like to have an intra-Africa migration. To get a passport, to fly from, I think to get in from South Africa to Ethiopia or from Ethiopia to South Africa is much harder than you would to other European countries. Why? I mean, there's these things they have to be figured out in these countries, but I do believe it's already happening. Some people are already trying to allow the diasporans to invest in ways that they haven't done before, but it is another challenge. We have to work that out. It still is on the, we are on the hand of the governments and see how that would work. On the first one, expanding ADN, the network is pretty loose and we do the best we can to bring in as many people as possible, but I'll be very happy to talk to you if you have some other ideas and we can take it offline. Thank you. There was someone who was raising hand and I wanted to, who was that?
Absolutely. Yeah.
Okay, go ahead.
Hi, I don't know if you're referring to me. My name is Oyetola. I work with the N Fund. I just wanted to quickly respond to the comment about trade, and I just wanted to highlight the African Continental Free Trade Area Agreement, which I think about 54 of the 55 AU countries have signed, and hopefully that will be one way to facilitate, freer movement, freer trade among African nations going forward. I know that quite a bit was done in 2019 and in the early part of 2020 in this regard, and I think that optimistically that is something that we can look forward to address the concern that was raised.
Thank you for sharing that. Yes, and especially on the free movement of Africans, that is, there are a few countries who are signatories to this, and I think they are already implementing it. If I'm not mistaken, Ethiopia and Kenya, Nigeria are a part of it. We'll see how many other countries. I haven't read recently, but I know the UN Commission on Africa has been part of this movement as well. There are two participants raising their hands. May I ask who they are?
Yes.
Yes.
Thank you very much. I'm David Pondeu from Japan.
Hi, David.
Yes, originally from Benin, but I'm currently in Japan. So our sister Elizabeth raised up one of my points. I want just to talk about what we're trying to do in Japan and see how African Diaspora Network can collaborate, because we are also organizing the African Diaspora platform here in Japan to make sure that we support African community in Japan by helping to find job first, because when people have the scholarship to Japan, after getting the master's degree, it's very hard for them to find job in Japan because of the language barrier. As I'm working in HR company in Japan, I found that that's a very key point we need to work on. And some of them want to start their own business. Then our second point is entrepreneurship, how to give them entrepreneurship support. So we think if there are some diaspora members who can help us to give this kind of lecture or support them with that, it will be great. And then the last point is the cultural awareness, because in Japan, they don't know that much about Africa. So we think it's important to promote our culture also. So those are the 3 points we are working on here in Japan. But we would like to see how to collaborate also with the African Diaspora Network, as most of the thing is going on there in US. What about coming to Asia here to see how we put our strength together to push to Africa? That's one of my points. The second point is something related to an incubator center I'm running personally back home in Benin. And my concept is to help young people to create job instead of looking for job, and we are pushing this entrepreneurship promotion and connecting technology that we can get from abroad to our country. And I know you guys are connected with Silicon Valley, and we might get some important partners from there. So I'm looking forward to discuss more about that point as well.
Okay, I just thank you so much, David. You and I will take this by email and we'll discuss the possibilities. I am very aware of the time. We have only 3 minutes. I want to thank each one. Yeah, I know. It's been really wonderful discussion. There were some additional things on the slide, but this one we've already talked about the survey, and you'll get the slides so you can go through it yourself, and we'll be having this discussion as we go on. This is not the last one. This is just the beginning. We've never done a Zoom call, but I would love to hear your opinion on what we could do to make it better in the future, since we've never done it, and I'll send the email as a follow-up email. I think for me, what I want to say is I'm very humbled by your insight, your presence, and being a part of this from around the world. Very humbled, David and Elizabeth, all from Asia, from Europe, from Africa, from the United States. Such a wonderful community. I feel very fortunate to be a part of all of you. There's a lot of work that we can do, and I really believe in the diaspora, working with Japanese, Asian counterparts, Europeans, Americans, and everywhere we are ambassadors to the continent and the communities in which we live. And I am very, very fortunate that we are able to do this. To make this happen, though, I always believe there is a need for collective action, and we definitely need to bring the African governments and policymakers and others into this discussion in order to make something that we believe is possible for the continent. We've had tremendous interest in the work that we've done, and for those of you who have been a part of the network, you know that every year we have something called the Impact and Innovation Forums, where we really address innovation, entrepreneurship, investment, and human capital development. Provided that we are still on closed out, especially in California, until May 3rd. We are continue to have the Zoom, and we have some wonderful individuals lined up for this upcoming virtual meetings until we are able to do in-person meeting. I wanted to make sure that you are aware of these opportunities. I want to make sure you have the hashtags. I'll send them, but I also shared, I want to recognize the Skoll Foundation for the opportunity. I want to thank Liesl for her time. She could have done a lot of different things like all of you, but for her participation, Liesl, wherever you are, thank you so much. I want to thank my colleagues, Deborah Passio and Caroline Ocampo, for their absolute support throughout the process. This was our first time, and I found out that actually, whether you do it offline or online, the process of coordination is the same, but I'm very grateful. And unless there is one last burning question, I wanted to be very aware of your time and let you go.
Thank you, Almaz.
Thank you so much, Almaz.
Thank you, everyone, and have a wonderful day and safe. I wish you the
Is
safe.
there a way for us to maintain contacts? Is there a way? Maintain contacts with the people on the call.
Is it okay for me to share your contact information, everybody?
Yeah, sure.
Yes.
Is that okay? I'll share it with everyone was in that call, because we got to get permission. If you all permit me, I will be happy to share with you.
Yes.
Share, thank you.
That's fine.
I will.
Thank
Thank you so much. Thank you. Have a wonderful day.
Thank you,
Bye-bye.
Almaz.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye, everyone.
Bye. Arigatou gozaimasu.
Okay, thanks, everyone. I'm trying to shut it down, but that's okay. Okay.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
How do we get the PowerPoint though?
I'll send it to you, the PowerPoint, and also some supplemental document. We're going to send you with the minutes and everything that came out. Give us some time. You should get it by mid next week, early next week at the latest.
Sure, no problem. Thank you
Thank
very
you,
much.
everyone. Bye-bye. Have a wonderful afternoon.